Previously on The Poor Orphan Girl Sleeps with Dogs in Exchange for Millions. I never believed I would sleep with a dog at the age of 16 to make money. I never thought I would become someone else's property either, trapped in luxury, my own voice lost behind gilded walls. But it happened, and everyone needs to learn from my story. My name's Sandra, and this is my story. Sandra had stopped speaking days ago, not because she couldn't, but because silence had become her only shield. The walls didn't echo anymore. They listened. Every word she'd once spoken now felt like it had cost her something she couldn't get back. Her voice was gone, not stolen, but surrendered. The girls around her noticed it first. They no longer asked if she was okay. They didn't whisper comfort. They stopped sitting beside her at mealtime. They called her the cursed one now, some with pity, others with quiet fear. To them, she was a warning. Proof of what happened when you dared to run, when you dared to hope. Madame Becky didn't raise her voice anymore either. She no longer punished Sandra with fire or threats. Instead, she watched her like a craftsman watches a prized tool, cleaning it, polishing it, never questioning if it wanted to be used. They gave Sandra new gowns, longer, heavier, crimson and black. They wrapped her hair in gold-threaded scarves. They dressed her like she was royalty, but she knew what she really was. Not a queen, not even a person. The vessel. The title felt like poison stitched into her name. It came with no explanation, just expectation. Sandra was no longer summoned like the others. She was prepared. Her baths were longer, her perfumes stronger, her collars tighter. Everything about her life now screamed performance. But the audience was still a mystery. Some days, she sat on the marble floor of her room and traced her scars with her fingertip. One for obedience, one for betrayal, one for trying to leave. Each scar told a story she didn't want to remember, but couldn't forget. She didn't cry anymore, not because she didn't feel, but because tears didn't fix anything here. They only told your enemies where it hurt the most. Silence made her invisible, and that invisibility made her dangerous. At least, that's what she told herself in the dark. She noticed how Becky's eyes lingered longer now. Not suspicious, curious, calculating, as if waiting for Sandra to break again or explode, as if trying to decide if she had underestimated her. But Sandra didn't move, didn't react. She just watched and waited. And something inside her, something small and whispering, began to grow. Not hope, not yet, but something close. Sandra was half asleep when she heard the soft click of her door opening. She jolted upright, heart immediately hammering in her chest. Shadows slipped silently across the polished marble floor. For a second, she thought Becky had finally come back, ready to finish whatever twisted plan she'd started. But it wasn't Becky's cold eyes that met Sandra's gaze. It was the young maid, the same girl who had quietly stitched Sandra's wounds, whose eyes had once shimmered with silent tears. The maid closed the door carefully behind her and hurried forward, barefoot and barely breathing. In her hand, she carried a small cloth bundle, her fingers trembling slightly. Sandra's muscles tensed. She wanted desperately to trust someone again, but trust had nearly cost her everything. The maid must have sensed Sandra's hesitation. Her eyes softened, and she slowly unfolded the bundle on Sandra's bedside table. Inside was bread, a boiled egg, and a tiny piece of folded paper. The girl's eyes never left Sandra's face, waiting for some reaction, some sign of trust. Sandra stared at the bread. She hadn't eaten properly in days, not because food wasn't offered, but because her stomach refused it. Everything tasted like shame, but now this simple gesture felt like comfort. Quietly, Sandra took the bread and bit into it. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to swallow, letting the warmth slowly spread through her body. The maid leaned closer, her voice barely more than breath. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "They watch everything now." Sandra met the girl's frightened eyes, silently asking why she risked coming here at all. "They don't trust you anymore," the maid continued softly, glancing quickly over her shoulder as if expecting the door to burst open any moment. "Not since you tried to run." Sandra's throat tightened painfully. She wanted to speak, wanted to ask questions, but fear held her tongue hostage. The maid pushed the tiny slip of paper toward Sandra. Her voice dropped even lower. "She is alive, Mama Kura. She watches from outside the walls. Waiting." Sandra's breath caught. Mama Kura. The name was whispered cautiously among the girls. A name wrapped in legend and fear. Mama Kura had been Becky's right hand once, but she had turned against the darkness, choosing to fight rather than obey. Sandra had always thought it was just a rumor, a story meant to keep rebellious girls dreaming. But now, something shifted in Sandra's chest. If Mama Kura was real, then so was hope. Fragile, dangerous hope, but hope all the same. "Listen," the maid continued urgently. "Not all the girls here are real. Some are spies. They'll listen, they'll watch, and then they'll betray." Sandra's mind raced. She quickly tucked the paper into her palm, heart thudding so loudly she wondered if the maid could hear it too. "How do I know who to trust?" Sandra finally managed, her voice breaking from days of silence. The maid's eyes shone with tears, but beneath them was steel. "You don't," she whispered. "Trust no one. But keep fighting quietly. Mama Kura will come, but only if she believes you haven't given up." With that, the girl turned, slipping back into the shadows before Sandra could respond, leaving only the faint echo of her warning behind. Sandra unfolded the small paper carefully. It was filled with symbols and words she didn't fully understand yet, but one phrase stood out, clear and bold. "You are not alone." Sandra tucked the paper tightly beneath her mattress, her mind spinning. For the first time since she'd returned, Sandra knew exactly what she had to do. Survive, at any cost. Sandra knew the knock was coming, even before it echoed softly through her door. She'd sensed the shift in the mansion's air, the heavy quiet that always preceded another dark ceremony. Her hands shook as she stood, but her expression stayed blank. They expected silence, obedience, emptiness, and for now, she would give them exactly that. 2 attendants waited outside her door, their pale gowns flowing silently around their ankles, their faces expressionless beneath tight head wraps. Without a word, they led her down a winding corridor she'd never traveled before. Her heartbeat quickened with every step. She counted each flickering candle on the wall, each carved symbol in the marble floor, trying to anchor her racing thoughts. At the end of the hall, a large, heavy door stood open just a crack. Sandra's skin prickled, dread pooling coldly in her stomach. As the attendant stepped aside, she understood they would go no further. Sandra pushed the door open slowly, stepping inside alone. The room was circular, lit only by tall torches burning with a strange bluish flame. The air was thick with smoke and incense, making her head spin. At the center stood Madame Becky, her dark velvet robes embroidered with intricate golden patterns, her expression unreadable beneath the shifting light. But Becky was not alone. Standing quietly to the side was a woman Sandra had never seen before, a foreigner. Her pale skin seemed to glow in the unnatural blue flames, and her golden gown shimmered like molten metal. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely, accentuating her sharp features. Sandra felt her throat close slightly at the sight of the stranger's cold, piercing eyes. Sandra's attention snapped back to Becky, who now held a small iron brand in her hand, its tip glowing faintly red. Becky stepped forward, her voice steady and measured. "Tonight you are elevated," she declared softly, her tone almost reverent. "No longer merely a vessel, but the heart vessel, the sacred core." Sandra's pulse surged violently. Before she could react, Becky placed a steady hand on her shoulder, guiding her gently yet firmly toward a low stone platform at the room's center. Sandra's muscles tensed, panic screaming inside her, but she forced herself to remain quiet, compliant. Fighting now would only worsen the pain. Her breath caught sharply as Becky lifted the glowing brand. The attendant stepped forward silently, pulling Sandra's gown aside to expose her shoulder blade. Becky pressed the hot metal against Sandra's skin without hesitation. A scream tore from Sandra's throat, raw and ragged. Pain exploded through her body, hot and merciless. Her vision blurred, tears streaking down her face, but she refused to collapse. She refused to beg. As Becky stepped back, Sandra raised her head, blinking away tears, trying to steady herself. That's when she saw it clearly. Becky was bowing slightly toward the foreign woman. Not a deep bow of respect, but one of acknowledgement, submission. Becky, who commanded absolute obedience from everyone in this mansion, now showed submission. Sandra's mind raced, questions swirling through the pain. Who was this woman? And why had Becky bowed? Afterward, back in her room, Sandra lay awake, her branded shoulder throbbing relentlessly. Her heart pounded as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. The foreign woman had not merely observed, she had overseen. And Becky had allowed it. A faint rustling drew her attention, and she found another scrap of paper beneath her pillow. Fingers trembling, Sandra unfolded it carefully. In the maid's hurried handwriting, one phrase stood clear and unmistakable. "She's not from here." Sandra's breath quickened, realization dawning with terrifying clarity. Whoever this woman was, she wasn't just another guest. She held power beyond Becky, beyond the mansion walls. She had become Sandra's greatest threat, and perhaps her only chance. Sandra's thoughts shifted sharply, her resolve hardening into something fierce and unyielding. She was no longer simply surviving. She was at the heart of something much darker, something that reached beyond everything she'd endured. And now she knew exactly where to strike. Thalia didn't speak for 2 whole days. She moved quietly like the rest of them, wore the same pale gown, and followed every order without protest. But Sandra noticed the difference immediately. It wasn't in how Thalia walked, but in how she watched. Her eyes didn't wander aimlessly like the broken girls who barely remembered their own names. No, Thalia's eyes searched, measured, calculated. She was looking for something, and that made Sandra both cautious and intrigued. It wasn't until the 3rd night that Thalia made her move. The hallway was empty, thick with the usual hush of curfew. Sandra sat on the floor outside the lavatory, her arms wrapped around her knees, pretending to be half asleep. Thalia appeared beside her like smoke, easing down without a word. They sat shoulder to shoulder for a full minute in silence. Then Thalia whispered, "There's a way out." Sandra didn't move. "But not for cowards," Thalia added, her voice barely louder than a breath. "Not for girls who still think they can obey their way to freedom." Sandra glanced at her from the corner of her eye, unsure whether to respond or recoil. But Thalia didn't wait for permission. She pulled a thin cloth from her pocket and placed it gently between them. Sandra hesitated, then unfolded it. A name was stitched across the faded fabric in careful, tight letters. Mama Kura. Her pulse jumped. Sandra had heard it before. Whispers from the maid, symbols scribbled on paper, stories passed in fear and secrecy. But to see it like this, clear and intentional, shook her. "She's real," Thalia said. "She's watching, and she's waiting. But she won't move until someone inside shakes this place hard enough." Sandra's mouth went dry. How do you know? Because she sent me. Sandra looked at her fully now. Thalia's face was hard, focused, but underneath it all, something flickered. Not desperation, not fear, fire. Thalia leaned in closer. There's an old tunnel, she said. It runs beneath the garden ruins. It was built during construction and forgotten once the mansion was sealed up. It connects to the edge of the forest, just beyond the east wall. Sandra's heartbeat quickened. But it's sealed, Thalia continued. A steel grate, biometric lock. Only 2 people can open it. Sandra didn't need her to say the names. Becky. And the woman in gold. We're going to need her fingerprint, Thalia said. And we're going to take it. Sandra shook her head slowly. She's guarded. She never eats with us. She only shows up during the rituals. Exactly, Thalia whispered. That's when we'll strike. Sandra felt her body tense. You want me to do it? You're the only one close enough to her during the ceremonies, Thalia said. You're the heart vessel. You stand next to her. You serve the wine. You kneel where no one else is allowed. Sandra's mouth went dry. And if she doesn't fall asleep, then you improvise, Thalia said. The silence that followed was loud, like thunder pressed into the walls. Sandra stared at the cloth again, the name etched into it like a brand of resistance. She didn't trust Thalia completely. She didn't trust anyone. But something about the girl's certainty, her lack of fear, reminded Sandra of who she used to be before the first scar, before the collar, before obedience became survival. Sandra folded the cloth and tucked it into her sleeve. Her voice came out steady. What do we need to make it happen? Thalia smiled. Her tea. Sandra was in the common room when Thalia arrived, escorted silently by guards whose blank faces seemed more ominous than usual. The girl moved with a quiet confidence Sandra hadn't seen in a long time. Her eyes were sharp, watchful, not the downcast gaze of someone beaten into submission. Sandra knew instantly. This girl was different. Thalia settled quietly onto a bench near the far wall, calmly observing her new surroundings. Her smooth skin and high cheekbones caught the dim, flickering light. Her hair was tied neatly, her presence a silent challenge to the mansion's suffocating gloom. Sandra felt a strange pull toward her, something she couldn't yet understand. That evening, as darkness seeped quietly into the mansion, Sandra sat alone, tracing invisible lines on the wooden table. Suddenly, Thalia appeared beside her, silent as a whisper, barely disturbing the air around her. Sandra's pulse quickened. For a long moment, neither spoke. "You're Sandra?" Thalia finally said softly, her voice clear, steady, unafraid. Sandra glanced at her cautiously, her silence thick with questions. Thalia leaned in closer, her voice lowering further. "They talk about you. How you almost made it out." Sandra's throat tightened painfully. She managed only a small nod. "You inspired some of us, you know." Thalia continued quietly, carefully scanning the room as she spoke. "Mama Kura believes you might still be strong enough." Sandra's breath caught sharply at the name. Mama Kura. She could feel hope beginning to rise dangerously inside her chest again. Her voice trembled, barely audible. "She's alive?" Thalia gave a tiny nod, her eyes flashing with determination. "Alive, and closer than you think. But she's waiting. She needs a sign that it's safe to move." Sandra frowned slightly. "What kind of sign?" "Rebellion," Thalia whispered, her voice sharp and fierce despite its quietness. "A disruption strong enough to draw attention, to show we won't stay silent anymore." Sandra stared into Thalia's eyes, seeing strength and resolve she desperately wanted to share, but fear still clawed at her throat. "You don't know what Becky is capable of," Sandra warned softly. Thalia's eyes hardened slightly. And Becky doesn't know what we're capable of either. The quiet defiance in Thalia's voice stirred something in Sandra, a sense of purpose she'd thought was long dead. But still, fear gripped her, memories of pain and punishment lingering too close to the surface. "There's an old tunnel beneath the garden ruins," Thalia continued urgently. "It leads outside, toward the village, but there's a biometric lock. Only Becky or the foreign woman can open it." Sandra's heart sank slightly. "Then it's useless." "No," Thalia insisted quickly. "We can use it. We just need to get the woman's fingerprint." "How?" Sandra asked quietly, uncertainty edging her voice. "During the next ritual," Thalia whispered firmly, "we'll sedate her tea. You'll be close enough, trusted enough, to get her fingerprint and escape." Sandra swallowed painfully, mind racing. It was dangerous, maybe even impossible, but Thalia's determination was contagious. "And if I fail?" Sandra asked, voice barely more than breath. Thalia's gaze didn't waver. "Then we all fail. But if we don't try, we've already lost." Sandra felt Thalia's words ignite something deep within her, a tiny spark of rebellion, fragile yet powerful. Finally, Sandra nodded slowly. "Tell Mama Kura we'll be ready." Thalia smiled, barely perceptible but strong enough to make Sandra believe in possibility again. As Thalia slipped back into the shadows, Sandra knew one thing clearly. No matter the cost, silence was no longer an option. The night arrived cloaked in thick silence, the air inside the mansion unusually still. Every flickering candle seemed to whisper warnings, their flames twitching nervously, as if they too sensed the storm brewing beneath the surface. Sandra lay in her bed, fully clothed, pretending to sleep. Beneath her pillow was a folded napkin soaked in a mild sedative Thalia had stolen from the nurse's station. The plan was simple in theory: slip the sedative into the white foreign woman's tea just before the ritual began, then use the haze of ceremony to lift her hand, press it against the tunnel scanner, and unlock the only real door to freedom. But simple had long ceased to exist in Sandra's world. When the knock came, Sandra's eyes flew open. She rose quickly, heart pounding, the vibration of fear and adrenaline coursing through her entire being. 2 guards stood at the door, as always, emotionless and tight-lipped. She followed them silently, clutching the small cloth under her sleeve, palms slick with sweat. Thalia was already in the ritual chamber when Sandra arrived, her face calm but her eyes burning with the intensity of everything they couldn't say aloud. The foreign woman arrived moments later, dressed in black silk, her white skin glowing like a candle under the red lights. She was holding a gold-trimmed teacup, the same ritual cup she drank from every time. Sandra's eyes locked onto it. She knew she had seconds. As the woman set the cup down briefly, Sandra moved like a shadow, unfolding the cloth and dabbing the rim with the sedative-laced fabric. It was done in a blink. Now she waited. Moments later, the woman took a long sip. Her expression didn't change, but Sandra watched closely, heart drumming wildly, fingers twitching with dread. The chanting began. The room pulsed with low, rhythmic hums and soft animal sounds that always seemed to echo from nowhere. The woman blinked slowly, then again. Her hand trembled slightly. Then she collapsed. Gasps erupted. A guard rushed forward, but Sandra stepped in, voice calm. "She's having a vision," she said quickly. "Don't interrupt." The guards hesitated, unsure. Becky nodded once, deep in her trance, and the moment passed. Sandra leaned over the woman, carefully lifting her limp hand, eyes darting toward Thalia, who stood by the exit in full view of the hallway beyond. But just as Sandra turned to signal, just as she took her first step toward the hidden path, something cold pressed against her temple, a gun. A voice, deep and unfamiliar, spoke beside her ear. "You thought we wouldn't know?" Sandra froze. The entire room had gone still. Even the candles seemed to hold their breath. She turned her head slowly, heart shattering as she saw another figure emerging from the shadows. Someone she hadn't seen in weeks. The young cleaner girl, the one she trusted, the one who had seen her hide the notebook. She wasn't alone. Behind her, cloaked figures in new masks stepped into the chamber, and Madame Becky opened her eyes. Smiling. "Let the second ritual begin," she whispered. Sandra's scream died in her throat. Everything went black. To be continued. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, kindly hit the subscribe button, like, and share with your friends. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss what happens next.